Welcome to the Business Building Blocks podcast, where we talk about struggles and celebrations that leaders and entrepreneurs experience on their journey to success. I'm your host, Kristina, and I'm passionate about helping you achieve massive amounts of success at work and at home. We'll talk about all things people and organizational wellness, share relatable stories, and feature insightful guests because quality people and processes are at the heart of every success story. Ready to learn, grow, and have fun? Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the Business Building Blocks podcast. I'm your host, Kristina Schmidt. Today's topic is going to be maybe a little heavier than some of my other topics are. I'll still probably lighten up beat because I can't help myself but be that. But it's a little bit more daunting, but it's something that, like a lot of other things, has been on my mind quite a bit lately, and actually quite a few years, to be honest, because it was something that was almost my aha moment for when I decided to walk away from a job and start a business. So the topic that I want to talk about is suffering. So I saw a meme, I don't know, maybe a few months ago at this point, but it was basically a clip of a Harry Potter movie when they're in that divination class and Ron is practicing the tea leaves and reading Harry's tea leaves. And he goes, "It says you're going to suffer, but you're going to be happy about it." So I just think of this a lot, and it was a meme about us Catholics because it is the way of life. We are called to carry our cross and suffer alongside Jesus, and he's suffering alongside us, and that's what's going to get us to heaven. So I want to talk about suffering because I do believe that there's good suffering, like in carrying your cross, but there's also bad suffering, and this bad suffering that should be calling us away from a path. So I would say we're on the right path when we feel like we're on the path with Jesus, but sometimes we find ourselves suffering and we start to ask ourselves the question, is this my suffering? Is this my cross? So when I was contemplating stepping away from this job that I had, I was actually asking myself this question. I was like, maybe this is my cross to bear. Maybe this is the thing that I'm supposed to suffer through because it supports my family. So it's a pretty good reason, right? You've got to support your family in some way and you're doing it for them. But then I started to actually back up and ask myself some different questions. And it may not be the ones that you're thinking. So the reason I'm recording this podcast right now is because last night I was doing a webinar and a question came through and it was such a good question. It really got me thinking, but I was like, no, it's still like my thoughts still go. So the question was, I'm not going to get it exactly right, but it was basically, how do we know we're on our right path when it seems that we're being called to do something where our skill set doesn't align? And that just reminds me. So today I was reflecting again. I had a lot of stories today about this because clearly I've been thinking about this a lot. I've actually been praying about some of it as well. But I started thinking through because skill set doesn't actually matter. And so the response I gave last night on the webinar was, don't worry about the skill set because the skill set isn't what it is. So it's not what the work is necessarily, it's the type of work. So it's not the skill, it's the type of work that you should be looking at. And that leans into Working Genius, which I talk about all the time because I love it. And it is such a simple way to assess. So what I want to do is I want to walk through some of these questions. I have 3 questions for you to help you discern, is this good suffering is this my cross? Or is this bad suffering and that's actually God trying to nudge me away and trying to show me, no, this is not the path. So I'm going to go, I don't think there's an order to these questions. I think that they're just all questions that you should pray about, should think about, and just really spend some time on if you're feeling like you're suffering and you're just not sure if it's right. So question number 1, where is the suffering leading? So to give you some, context for it, when I was discerning business or keep working for others, I started looking at, okay, so I'm suffering because I said I'm suffering because I'm working 6 days a week. I am suffering because I'm just not happy in my work. I feel like it's a drudge to go. So I was feeling very burnt out all the time. So for a while, the burnout, I was thinking that was my cross to bear. But I started to look at, okay, what is this 6 day a week thing for? Is this because it's going to lead me to something greater that will then further support my family? Or is it just going to continue on and on and on and on and on and on? And it was the latter. I was working these hours and I was like, well, it's not to get a promotion because there's nowhere to go. It's not to, get me more freedom eventually or something, because that's not happening either. And I was just like, it's not taking me anywhere. And in fact, what my answer really was that came was that it was taking me away from my vocation. So I could see with my kids that my vocation is to be their mother. That is my most primary vocation in this world. That's my first job. And when I could see that this was just taking away from it, there was not going to be a benefit for my family. There was only taking away from my vocation and taking me away from the kids and taking me away from my family. And I was like, that doesn't make sense anymore. So that's when I said, oh, well, this can't be good suffering, because good suffering would be within my vocation maybe, or it would be taking me towards my vocation. Like maybe if you feel your vocation is to marriage and children, that maybe, going through a period of not dating, maybe that's a form of suffering that would be good, because you're learning about yourself and it's forcing you to go through these things, because knowing about yourself is going to make you a better partner, a better parent, a better everything, really, leader. I talk about that all the time, of course, a leader, but it's going to make you better off. So maybe that suffering of that being alone is the suffering taking you towards your vocation. So that leads me to the second question. So I would start to look at your behaviors. So, okay, when I'm in this suffering, am I behaving? Am I doing the things that God would want me to do? So just to let you know, when I suffer, when I'm miserable, I tend to have a little bit of a potty mouth, and I feel like in this perfect point, I was very snippy. I was actually not doing a good job when I got home. I was being a bad mother. I was being a bad spouse. I was not doing a good job and doing God's will when I left my work either. And sometimes that is a form of burnout. So when you're in that burnout, this is what the webinar was about. So it is a form of burnout as well. So if you're finding that this suffering is actually burnout, then it could be an indication that it's not for God, because we're not going to burn out doing God's work. We might have a hard time. We might struggle with it. Like if you look at Mother Teresa's life, she was in a desolation of spiritual desolation for years, and was doing really hard work, like servicing the poor, being there for them, loving them. But although she was in a spiritual drought for many, many, many years of the times that she was doing that, she still had joy in her work. And when we're using our charisms, when we're working in our geniuses, when I've just learned about the motivation code. So when we're working in our motivations, our God-given motivations, we have joy. We might be miserable, but we have joy. And so it goes back to the suffering comment. We're going to suffer, but we're going to be happy about it. So if you're finding that you are just miserable and literally no joy, don't want to get out of bed, totally burnt out, that could be a huge indication that is bad suffering, not good suffering. And the third question is, am I using my God-given gifts? So if you're struggling with identifying the first two questions, that last question would say, am I using my God-given gifts? Am I working in my geniuses? Am I using my charisms? Am I using my motivations? So if you don't know what these are, then it's worth discernment. It's worth taking a quiz or an assessment, whatever it may be. The easiest one, I will tell you all day long, yes, I'm a certified working genius facilitator, but the easiest one is by far the working genius. And you can just go and take that and start to learn about it more. So if you want to grab one of those on my website, it's just KristinaSchmidt.ca/workinggenius. You can grab one right there. And if you would like, you can even book a one-on-one with me to really dig into, are you using your gifts well? Are you not using them? What can you do to use them more? Because when we're not using our gifts, we will find the burnout. We will suffer needlessly. We'll suffer for our own purposes. So I want to address some of the issues because these are some of the thoughts that I had when I was going through this. So there was this feeling of stuckness, right? I know I just made that word up, but this feeling of being stuck in a world where like, this is all I've ever done. I'm this far along my career path and I don't want to do it anymore. And I'm miserable. And it's taking me away from my vocation. And I'm not using my gifts. So what do you do when you're there? I was probably there. Thankfully, I think God opened a door up for me because there's a lot of prayer going on from my end to say, what am I supposed to be doing? And there was a lot of nudging happening from him to point me at a lot of different options. So I'll tell you the story because I'm on story mode today for some reason. So I always say, like, when I started this business, when I started doing leadership training, I started with a franchise. And I always say that franchise was like my Aaron. So for those of you who know the Moses story, Moses, God asked me, said, hey, you're going to go talk to Pharaoh. You're going to go explain that he's got to let your people go. And Moses is like, I can't speak. I've got this like stutter. I can't go talk to Pharaoh and tell him this stuff and say, let my people go and argue with him I can't do this. So he gave him Aaron basically as his companion and his partner to go and do that with. And I, like, for some reason that has always jumped out in my mind. And I said, oh my gosh, this franchise is my Aaron. So I feel like, as far as me starting a business, I had 3 opportunities to do so. So the first one was when I started working. I was starting to do this like lean consulting. It's what I knew. And I knew I wanted to work with businesses to help them get better and to share my gifts with them. I knew I wanted to do that. The only thing I felt qualified to do that in was basically lean manufacturing. So I was going to go and I was going to help people put lean in place. But I quickly realized that, well, actually, I knew it, but I realized after I was doing it, because I knew from my experience, yeah, you might know the things you need to do, but sometimes you struggle to do them. And what I learned through going to help people, because I was like, well, I can't do it for you because you're the leader and they need to see the leader doing it. So that was hard for them. But what I realized is that they needed help leading. And that's what gets in the way. So anyway, that was opportunity one. And it was very eye-opening to me. And I took a position, another full-time position, after I did a little stint of that because I was afraid. So God put the opportunity in front of me and said, here you go. But I was afraid. But to be fair, I don't think that was what he wanted me to do. I don't want to be, and I don't think God wants me to be a lean implementer necessarily. And I mean, because I'm not, and I don't think I want to do it. But time number two, I actually had a conversation. So I'd taken this full-time position and I had a conversation with somebody and I was like, gosh, I really just want to work for myself. Like I knew I wanted to work for myself. And it would have, again, been like a process improvement sort of role. And I was like, just not quite it. And so I didn't do it again. Then a few months later, I just knew I needed something. I knew I needed a change. I knew I needed to do something new and something different. And an opportunity just opened itself up to join this franchise at a price I could afford and start doing what I always wanted to do. I had been, every time I went to a leadership course, I was like, gosh, I want to do that. I want to be the trainer in this room. I don't want to sit in this room. And I always told myself I couldn't. I didn't think I had the skills. When I was trying to come up with a business plan to go out on my own with, I was like, all I know is lean, but they need more than lean. They don't just need lean. And I just don't want to just do lean. I like it. It's great. But I wanted to work with people. I wanted to do this stuff. So the Lord put the opportunity in front of me and he gave me that help and that safety net that I needed. And so I want to talk to the people who feel they're stuck. If you've found that the answers to these questions is saying that you're suffering for bad, this is not your cross to bear, then know that there's a different cross to bear. And I want to bring it all back home to maybe the opposite. So 3 things that would be the opposite. So if you're contemplating something. So again, when I was making this decision, so this final decision to jump into the franchise, I was really trying to take some time to slowly make the choice because I have a tendency to go, yes, let's do the thing because that sounds great. And then I think about it after. So that is my tendency. So I was like, nope, this is really big. This is huge. I'm walking away from a paying job to go and do something that I've never done before. I've never had to sell like in order to work. Like I worked, I got paid. I knew the leadership models. I could do that part, but I never sold anything. I'd never like run my own little business before. So I was like, okay, what can I do here? And so I prayed on it. I prayed on it as well as I could and I made sure I went to confession. And I remember I had gone to confession. I want to say it was right before Palm Sunday because I went with one of our priests who's moved on at this point, but he did the Palm Sunday Mass. And I still remember the homily from that. And because it just spoke to me. So when I confessed to him, I said, hey, I'm contemplating something and so I talked to him about it during confession. And it was almost like he was speaking to me during Mass, like the next day or the couple days later. And he told me 3 things, or he said 3 things in there. He said, when you're trying to figure out if you're going to do something, if this is the right move, you need to know if it's your passion, but it's like passion 3 ways. So the passion of Christ is a suffering, right? So is it your passion? And do you have belief that you can do it? And as part of that passion, are you willing to suffer for it? And when I took that around what I was doing here, I was like, yes. I have passion for it because, yes, I can see such a need in terms of helping businesses achieve their potential, helping people find the freedom that they should have to live their lives, to do well at work, but to go home and live their lives because they've been fulfilled at work, because they have structure set up at work, they've led their team well, they've set processes in place. So yes, I had the passion for that because I hated and I still hate to see people married to their work. It is not, that's not our spouse. It never is. Maybe if you're a priest, I guess I can't, it's priest or nun maybe, but it's never your spouse if your vocation is to be married with kids. And I hate to see that. I hate to see it wrecking that part of your life, wrecking your vocation. And I see it too often. So I had the passion and I had the belief I could do it because I think I'm pretty good at it. Yeah, I've got rough edges that need to come off, but I think I'm pretty darn good at what I do. God gave me that skill set, right? And that sales skill set, I can learn it. So don't be afraid to learn something new because you can. You can learn something new. You can do all sorts of new things. What you can't do is you can't trade in your gift. God gave you a gift and there's no refunds and you got to use it. And if you use it, you'll find joy. But with that joy, you're going to find joyful suffering. So are you willing to suffer for it? So I don't know to what extent I am meant to suffer for this use of this gift and for this business and this mission that I've been given, but I'm willing to. I'm willing to do things that people are like, are you sure this is a good time? And I'm willing to do things to put myself out there, do these podcasts because I just love sharing it with you, and to do these things that feel like suffering sometimes. I don't suffer doing the podcast. I quite enjoy them, but you know what I mean? Putting myself out there, sometimes making people want to listen to it and saying, oh, download my podcast, that's suffering for me. So doing some of that suffering is worth getting to help my clients, getting to share these messages with you, helping you to discern, is this good suffering or bad suffering? So if you enjoyed today's episode, if you found it valuable, leave me a comment. If you're watching on YouTube, leave me a review. If you're listening on any of the podcast apps, and subscribe, share it with a friend, because again, I love to share it with people and I need your help doing that. So share it with a friend, subscribe, come check out my website, and I'm going to plug the Working Genius because my goodness, that will help you discern this. If you haven't discerned it yet, if you still can't discern it, asking those questions, go take your Working Genius assessment. So you can do that at KristinaSchmidt.ca/workinggenius. The link will be in the show notes. All right. I will see you on the next episode of the Business Building Blocks podcast. Thank you for listening to the Business Building Blocks podcast, where we talk about all things people and organizational wellness, because quality people and processes are at the heart of every successful business. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to hit the subscribe button so you know when new episodes are released. You can also follow me on Instagram at KristinaSchmidt.ca, where I share real-life tips to help in your leadership and life journey. To get one-on-one and team support with your leadership development, book a discovery call on my website at KristinaSchmidt.ca. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.